Halloween has never really been my thing, okay? And I know that puts me solidly in the minority of most people, but Halloween's never really been my thing. I do like candy, so I like that part of it. I've been sneaking candy from my kids' buckets after they go to bed at night. You're doing it too, I know you are. Exactly. And I do think it's fun to dress up in silly costumes and all that, but I don't like the creepy, scary, haunted house part of Halloween, you know? I mean, being chased by fake zombies with chainsaws in a cornfield, right? That's not my idea of fun. It's not something I want to do. In fact, my entire life, I've never watched a single horror movie. Not one single time. Unlike my wife and the rest of my family and friends who watch them a lot, which is evident, actually, whenever we would go rent a cabin somewhere in the remote woods. It was dark, it was foggy outside, you could hear a weird noise off in the distance, and I'd ask, hey, who wants to go outside and go for a walk down by the lake, right? Or in the old barn and get some fresh air. You'll be surprised to hear this, but there were never any takers. I always went on those walks by myself, actually. So no, Halloween has never really been my thing, but parenting is my thing. And so it was, I found myself on Stanley Street Thursday evening in the pouring rain, helping my kids to get more candy than I would ever actually allow them to eat in some ways. Now, besides the crowds, the craziness on Stanley Street it's a lot of harmless fun for families when it's not in the middle of a monsoon. And you definitely, see some funny and weird and interesting costumes, right? I saw some of you there, so I know what that means. And I can't tell you how many people, I come across out there that if I saw them not on Halloween night, I would know exactly who they were, right? But being all dressed up, I just couldn't tell for sure who they really were. And actually, when you stop and think about it, really, isn't that the case? Whether it's Halloween, and someone is dressed up, or maybe when it's not Halloween, just normal life, and they aren't. So often we think we know who someone is, right? We think we know who someone is. I don't mean recognizing them. We look at someone and we think deep down we know who they really are. And we think we know that just from looking at them, right? Judging them based on appearance or by the people they are with or what they do for their job or even how they spend their free time. Or we think we know exactly what they believe or think just from one thing we heard them say or something we saw them post or maybe in something someone told us they said. Or even worse, what we just assume people like them would say. But the truth is that probably more often than not, we aren't as good at knowing who someone really is as we think we are. And yet, sadly, that doesn't seem to stop people from being pretty judgmental when it comes to how we treat each other. There's a lot of debate these days about the so-called cancel culture that seems to be taking a hold in our world. Cancel culture. What that means is there is such a striving for ideological purity, whether that be in politics or social issues or religion or really just anything for that matter, that when someone says something or does something that people think is wrong, well, then the intent becomes to cancel that person out, right? To attack them to the point that they are wiped out, so much so that they cease to exist in any public way. And social media being one of the main ways people coordinate to do that. Now, I realize that there is a lot here, and it's a complicated issue because certainly there are times when people do serious harm or do something seriously wrong that needs to be lifted up and spoken against. And social media does give people who might not normally have a voice a chance to have one. And again, that's a complicated issue. If you want to talk more about it, come to my journey group tonight and we'll dig into that a little deeper. We have to remember, too, there's also a danger here when we strive for such ideological purity that we begin to lose sight of the fact, again, that we aren't always as good as we think we are at judging who people really are or aren't. And that's whether it's Halloween or not. I think deep down there is a truth that we all know, that often those we think of as saints, and at least in our mind, are so often just as much sinners. Right? And those that we kind of dismiss or think of as sinners, well, they might actually be saints as well. Which, come to think of it, is exactly what Jesus spent his life pointing out. And Jesus was all about exposing people's lack of grace and lack of good judgment. He taught again and again about how we human beings, we can't always be trusted to know a saint from a sinner, right? Talked about how often we get them confused because we get so focused on the wrong things. And a perfect example of that is actually our gospel story from Luke today. We hear the story of Zacchaeus, right? He of children's song fame. In case you didn't know, Zacchaeus was a wee little man. A wee little man was he. Climbed up in a sycamore tree because the Lord he wanted to see. Yeah, don't pretend you're not singing it in your head. You know the song. And it's going to be stuck with you for the rest of the day now, too. You're welcome. You're welcome. Now, what we don't hear about in the children's song is who Zacchaeus really was. And the fun, cute song aside, let's just say he is probably the least popular member of the Jericho Rotary Club, for sure, right? And ironically, the name Zacchaeus actually means righteous. Ironic because Luke describes him as the kind of sleazeball person that we just sort of love to hate. You see, Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector, meaning that he was a Jewish person who collected taxes from his own people for the Roman oppressors. So he was a traitor to the political cause. And Luke says that he was also rich. And surprise, surprise, how did a Roman tax collector get rich? Well, by extortion, by embezzlement, by taking advantage of the elderly, by exploiting the working poor, taking care of his cronies. There's an unspoken assumption here of the corruption in Zacchaeus. And so Zacchaeus is a man who deserves our disdain. And so when Jesus sees him, and he changes courses, and he starts walking towards the tree that Zacchaeus has made into his lookout, and it's obvious, Jesus is headed straight for Zacchaeus, the crowd begins to gather, right? Like sharks circling in the water, and they're thinking, oh yeah, it's judgment time for Zacchaeus. I mean, they were excited about the prospect of Zacchaeus finally getting his due, right? Finally having his dishonesty exposed. I mean, they were anxious for Jesus to cancel out this no-good sinner who had schemed his way to success at their expense, literally. But in the story, that's not what happens at all, is it? Instead, Zacchaeus walks up to the tree, or Jesus walks up to the tree, and he says, Zacchaeus, come on down, for I'm going to your house today, right? I'm going to your house today, I'm going to your, sorry, I just can't help myself, right? And that might not seem like a big deal to us, right? That Jesus is going to call Zacchaeus down and go to his house, but in Jesus' time, you have to remember, sharing a meal with someone and enjoying their hospitality, I mean, that was a big deal. And what Jesus is doing by allowing Zacchaeus to show him his hospitality is he is giving honor and he is giving worth to Zacchaeus in Jesus' eyes. It was showing that Jesus accepts him as he is. And he sees someone who belongs with Jesus. He gives him his unconditional love, which is pretty much a summation of the entire theme of Luke's gospel, summed up in the stories we have heard over the last few months about all through chapter 15, the theme being that Jesus welcomes sinners, and the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. But the people that day in Jericho who had gathered to witness this event, this interaction between Jesus and Zacchaeus, obviously they didn't get the scroll about these things because they're not happy about how this whole thing has gone down. I mean, this isn't how cancel culture is supposed to work. I mean, where was the judgment and the condemnation? Where was the public shaming, right? And they grumbled to Jesus about why he would give his acceptance and mercy, why he would give it so easily and so freely to a no-good sinner like Zacchaeus. And then what happens next in the story is the interesting twist. Because you see, in the face of all of the grumbling about him and people judging him as just some no-good sinner, Zacchaeus defends himself before the crowd. Now, in the text as we heard it this morning, when Mary read it, it says that Zacchaeus says that he will give his possessions to the poor. And he will repay fourfold all the people that he's cheated. And when you read the story that way or hear it that way, it's pretty straightforward. Right? Zacchaeus is a sinner who repents, and he's converted on the spot, and he promises future reparations to atone, which is the way the story has been typically understood. But if you look closely at the Greek text, you see that the verbs are actually in the present tense, not in the future tense. In other words, Zacchaeus, in that way, isn't a sinner who converts, but he's somewhat of a saint who surprises. I mean, he doesn't make promises about the future. Rather, he's defending himself, and he shocks the crowd, really, by appealing to his past. Translated the right way, it says, Lord, he says, I always give half of my wealth to the poor. And whenever I discover any fraud or discrepancy, I always make a fourfold restitution. You know, this crowd spent so much time demonizing Zacchaeus with all sorts of false assumptions. You know, they think they know who he is. They want him canceled out. But Jesus sees him differently. Jesus praises him as a son of Abraham. It turns out that Zacchaeus does actually live up to his name. He is, in fact, a righteous one. And obviously, Jesus could see that all along. Now, that doesn't mean that Zacchaeus wasn't a sinner and that he hadn't done a lot of things wrong, and Jesus in no way condones the bad things that he had done. It's just that there was more to Zacchaeus than just being a sinner. Jesus could see that he was so much more. And thank God that he could. And thank God that he can. I mean, because who here this morning desperately does not want to be defined only by our mistakes, our sins, right? But also about the good in us as well. I mean, I know I don't. I mean, we're all sinners. This is a newsflash. Hopefully that's not a newsflash for you, right? We're all sinners. I'm pretty sure we know that. If you don't, you should come talk to me sometime in my office. I'll fill you in. You know, we're all sinners. We live in a world full of people that are more than happy to point that out for us, right? Every chance they get, at home, at work, in social circles, all the time, you know, and through any kind of media available to them. So yes, we're all sinners, all equally in need of the mercy and grace of God, but we can never forget that that's not all we are. And that's not all other people are either. Well, today is All Saints Sunday, and it is a day for us to remember all of the saints that have gone before us in our faith in the past. You know, those who built this church and built this community, and those who helped build us, right? Passing on this life of faith to us as we look to pass it on to the next generation. And that's a powerful legacy to be a part of that we should never forget. But All Saints isn't just about the past, it's also about the present. It's about our identity in the present, and it's about our future as well, and where we go with our faith from here, which is why All Saints is a baptism Sunday. You can see all the movement up here for all the kids here for that baptism Sunday, right? And the 5 children that we baptized here this morning, they were born into a fallen world, a world where sin is in all of us. But in baptism, here in a moment, they will be adopted into God's family, and they will be made saints. And with that, They will have the promise of God's grace and forgiveness, and they will have the gift of the Holy Spirit that will be given to them, and that will be with them forever. They will be what we are, saint and sinner at the same time. Capable of bad things, yes, but also so capable of good and kind and beautiful things. And when we remember that reality, and we remember how Jesus lived his life, how he treated both saints and sinners, then how could we ever be a part of trying to cancel someone out? And that doesn't mean we condone bad things or look the other way or we should just get along about all sorts of stuff. It doesn't mean that. There is still right and wrong in this world, and there will always be injustices that need to be called out and addressed and talked about. I mean, Jesus did that too. But, like that crowd murmuring about Zacchaeus, it is all too easy for us to be blinded by our prejudice of those people, right? It's all too easy for us to trick our minds into treating other people as less than what they are. And so we are reminded again this morning by Jesus, and it is a reminder that we desperately need in our lives, that regardless of how well we think we might know who someone is, we can never know for sure whether they're wearing a Halloween costume of some kind or not. But what we can know for sure is that every other person is just like us, and that we are called by God to treat others the same way that God has always treated us, with grace, with kindness, and forgiveness, regardless of what has been said, what hasn't been said, what has been done, or what hasn't. And I hope and I pray that we will actually go and live that out in our lives, because this world needs people like that. This world needs people like us. Sinners, yes, but also saints of God.